Hello, good evening, everybody. Welcome to our Tech Tuesday. And we've been focusing on gut health this month. And we started last week and we learned a little bit about how the gut works, what it does, what it doesn't do, what we need to be aware of, and how we need to take care of it, because your gut is a very, very important part of your whole system. Just as a brief summary, basically everything that goes in here has to go through the gut, get broken down, and then assimilated into the system so that we can get all the vitamins, minerals, and nutrients that we need from the food that we eat. Because it's pointless filling up this side and nothing's being absorbed. So if your gut is not working correctly, you are probably not absorbing the nutrients correctly, and therefore you are probably starving to death, even though you might be eating very, very large meals. And as I've always said, diet is what you eat. Nutrition is what your body absorbs. And I'll refine that down even further. It's what your cells absorb. And if you are not absorbing the nutrients, you are not getting the things that your body needs, regardless of how much you are stuffing in your face. So let me share my screen and pick up from where I left off last week. I'm just got to lose a couple of these things over here. Okay. So if your gut is not working correctly, you're not getting your ideal nutrition. So what's the difference between fat and thin? In an article by Dr. Jim McAfee in September of 2015, titled The Microbiome, he states that more than 1 in 3 American adults are obese. That is 36%. That was in 2015. Scarily enough, that was 9 years ago. And I think those stats are now probably closer to 1 in 2. So pretty much 50% of American adults, and I would say getting very close to South African adults as well, are classified as obese. Almost 1 in 5 children and adolescents, or about 17%, also suffer with obesity. And obesity can cause all sorts of problems. It's not just the fact that you are overweight or fat, but obesity causes all sorts of other issues. Scientists are increasingly looking at the bacteria in the gut as contributors to the problem of obesity. So it's not just the food that people are eating or the inactivity that goes along with it. Children in rural Africa are really obese. Have you ever been out in the bush, for want of any better terminology, and seen African children who are grossly overweight? The ones in town, yes. The ones who are in urban areas, yes. A lot of them, and unfortunately, I see a lot of them in my practice for various different reasons. They are obese. Children out in the bush who are running around free and eating food that's grown in the bush or in lands that they've planted and cultivated organically. Very rarely do you find one that is obese. And a classic study was published in 2010 comparing the bacteria in the digestive tract of African children compared to European children. The African children had far more bacteria from the Bacteroidetes family and far fewer from the Firmicutes family than did European children. And I did cover these two strains of bacteria last week. So if you want to see what I was talking about there, please feel free to go back to the recording from last week and check it out. Some of the bacteria in the gut of African children were efficient at breaking down plant fiber. Remember, we need fiber in our diets in order for this bacteria to grow. These bacteria were completely lacking in European children, mostly because They don't get any fiber. So how do we build this healthy microbiome? The microbiome is what you find in your gut. It's a combination of good bacteria and bad bacteria. And obviously, in nature, everything needs to be in balance. So you need more, or at least equal, good bacteria to bad bacteria. But in this particular case, you want the imbalance to be closer to more healthy bacteria or good bacteria than the bad ones. The health of the microbiome can be improved in almost everyone by making a few simple lifestyle choices, because obesity in most cases, and I will say most, not all, because there are some cases where things like your pituitary gland is malfunctioning due to cancer or some other medical reason that can lead to obesity. People who are taking chronic or steroids for as a chronic medication become overweight and obese. So there are some reasons why obesity happens, not diet related. But firstly, the way that we can get it sorted out is we add fermented foods like yogurt, kimchi, tempeh, and sauerkraut to the diet. I'm not too sure about you, but out of those four things, what are you eating on a daily basis? Me personally, I like yogurt. However, the bad thing is my yogurt is sweetened, which is essentially becoming null and void. However, there is still good bacteria in that yogurt, but your ideal yogurt is your raw Greek yogurt with live bacteria in it. Kimchi and tempeh I'm not familiar with. Sauerkraut, definitely not my favorite, but I know it's quite a delicacy for Germans especially, but I know a lot of people do enjoy sauerkraut. Secondly, we need to reduce the intake of refined sugars and carbohydrates while increasing the intake of complex plant carbohydrates with their natural fibers. Remember, carbohydrates are not the enemy as such. The refined carbohydrates, so they've taken out everything, all the good stuff has been taken out. You're left with the pure carbohydrate, which is the white sugar that we're all familiar with. That is bad. The complex carbohydrate, which is what your plants are made up of. So think of sugarcane. Sugarcane on its own is actually a complex carbohydrate because it's got your fiber, it's got your sugar, and it's got a lot of other trace elements of vitamins and minerals in it. So sugar cane is comparatively healthy. What the problem, or where the problem comes about, is when they strip away all that good stuff. So all the fiber, all the minerals, all the vitamins, everything gets stripped away, and they just take out the sugar. And that is what we eat, and that is where the danger comes in. So if you take away all the natural fibers, you're left with your simple carbohydrate. That is where your problem comes about. Healthy fats are found in things like avocado, nuts, and olives, which also promote beneficial bacteria. Again, how many of these things are you eating on a daily basis? I know I don't eat a lot of this on a daily basis. Olive oil is what I use to cook with. Nuts, my personal preference there is the raw nuts, unsalted, unroasted, but you battle to find those. And I know when it comes to going to Bloemfontein, that is what I use when I'm driving, because I find that it keeps me awake, keeps me focused, and it's a good source of fiber, and it's a good source of vitamin E, amongst other things. So raw nuts, always good. But most of the ones that you find in the shops are roasted and salted. Not always a good thing. And it sounds simple, but we need to avoid junk fats. In other words, all your junk food, your fast foods, Those are the bad fats. Thirdly, we need to supplement the diet with sources of polyphenols and flavonoids. What are these big fancy words? These powerful antioxidants are found in tea and have been shown to positively promote diversity of microbes in the digestive tract while suppressing pathogens. So this is your tea, specifically green tea, but also other teas. And I think this is why the Chinese are so big into their tea, and they also have a pretty healthy diet. Chinese and the Japanese, or your continental people, have got very good diets because they drink a lot of tea. Polyphenols also reduce the inflammatory activity in the gut. Remember, disease is caused by inflammation. And inflammation is caused by an imbalance in your system. Fourthly, we need to increase the intake of prebiotics or food beneficial bacteria, or food that beneficial bacteria can feed upon. So you're wanting the raw foods, not the junk foods, because the junk food and the sugars or simple carbohydrates is what the bad bacteria feed on. We want to feed the good bacteria. And these include things like garlic, onions, leeks, Jerusalem artichoke, and many other fiber-rich foods. Now, when I look at all of this, and I look at what I'm eating daily, very, very few of these things will be found on my plate. Yes, when I cook with garlic a lot. Like this evening, the food had garlic, and it had herbs and spices, and it had olive oil. But I didn't have a lot of these other things in there. There was rice as well, just by the way. Now, the mucilage in aloe vera is such a potent prebiotic that researchers have suggested adding it to a variety of food products. And you will find a lot more products these days that do contain aloe vera. Now, the question always is, where's that aloe vera coming from, and how have they processed it? Healthy fiber intake also promotes a normal transit time, which prevents the overgrowth of bacteria in the colon, which can lead to toxin accumulation. Remember, what goes in the top has to come out the bottom, and preferably within a few hours. Shouldn't stay in there for 2 or 3 days, which some people with chronic constipation have happen. Because if you are constipated, all the waste product stays in your system, and while it's there, it's rotting and it's causing a buildup of toxins. And that can be deadly. Sounds very gross, I know, but think about taking some fresh meat, and it's summertime over here now, and you leave it out on your kitchen sink. Not anywhere near the fridge, not anywhere near anything, just that lump of fresh meat being dumped on your kitchen counter, and you leave it there for a couple of days. What's going to happen? Is it going to smell good? What's it going to do? I can give you a pretty good idea, but it'll become very gross if I describe it. So I'll let your imagination run wild. But essentially, that's what happens in our gut, because you've got all this stuff that's sitting rotting. And I really don't want to be too gross, but that's what's happening. Now, you've got this buildup of toxins in your system, and this is where problems come about. So you want to get rid of that junk as soon as possible. So it goes in, your body breaks it down, uses everything that it needs, creates the waste product, and that must go into your sewage system as soon as possible, because otherwise you're going to be in trouble. And then we need to drink pure water. Now, I don't know about where you are, but locally, our water is not considered that pure. And my suggestion would be that all of your water should be filtered. The reverse osmosis water, in my opinion, has been sterilized quite a bit. I really am under correction on this because I do not know that much about reverse osmosis, but I'm saying what I've been told from people who do work with it on a regular basis. And reverse osmosis is almost sterile water. You don't want sterile water because water itself actually needs to be alive, just not quite that alive. So all of my drinking water goes through a filter that also contains silver and carbon to sterilize, or not to sterilize it, but to get rid of all the bad stuff, all the bad bacteria, and it leaves it with as close to normal drinking water as possible, with all the ions and the minerals and that sort of thing that it needs to have, but it doesn't have any of the bad stuff in there. We need to drink sufficient of this pure water on a daily basis. And my suggestion would be to also cook with pure water. The chlorine and fluorine in many drinking water supplies is sufficient to kill off beneficial gut bacteria. Somewhere along the line, somebody decided that we need fluoride, which supposedly is good for the teeth, in water. Pardon me. But we're now getting too much of this. So the chlorine, obviously, they need to put that in order to filter the water or to cleanse the water. But if that chlorine doesn't break down and it stays in the system, it is going to cause hardening of your arteries. And Jim McAfee has got some interesting stories about that, where a gentleman that he was dealing with had hardening of his arteries and they couldn't work it out. And when he went to this guy's house, he found out that in the trailer park where he was living very close to the water filtration plant. And obviously any water that was coming out of the taps was right from the plant. And he would tell him that it tastes like swimming pool water. And when Jim tested the water, he found it was swimming pool water because the chlorine levels were so high that it was essentially, he was drinking swimming pool water. And he managed to change that, helped him put in some filters, and this guy's problem went away within a couple of days. So you've got all these toxins in the water that can kill off your good bacteria. So it's very important to drink pure water. Spring water, if you have access to it. Yeah, the bottled stuff, do we know where and how it's processed? I don't know, which is why I prefer my own filter in the house, because I know exactly what's happening over there. And finally, periodic fasting or caloric restriction has been shown to promote beneficial bacteria associated with an increased lifespan. Now, we're not saying go off and don't eat for 4 days. If that's what you want to do and you feel that you should be doing it, go for it. But that's not how this periodic fasting works. And I won't get into it in this presentation, but there is a technique to this. Now, undereating also prevents overgrowth of bacterial populations in the gut due to reduced material to feed upon. So again, we see with nature, you want everything in balance. Too much of something is bad. Too little of something is bad. You've got to get that happy medium. Now, with another Jim McAfee newsletter that I saw, he speaks about a thing called leaky gut syndrome. I don't know if anybody's heard of this, but the chances of being diagnosed with leaky gut syndrome are pretty remote. It does not even occur to many doctors to check for the condition. The further complication is that gut distress often manifests as disease in other parts of the body. It really makes diagnosis quite tricky. So leaky gut syndrome is one of the most misunderstood concepts in modern medicine. This condition is associated with an abnormal increase in the permeability of the small intestine. Think of a rubber tube that you stretch out right thin, that you can see through it. And you put water on there and it just pretty much goes straight through. That's what's happening in your gut. Increased permeability of the small intestine is associated with a wide variety of conditions, including inflammatory and infectious bowel diseases, such as Crohn's and celiac disease, arthritis, skin conditions such as acne, hives, eczema, and psoriasis, liver disease, pancreatic disease, chronic fatigue syndrome, depression, and food allergy. Do any of these things sound familiar to you? And this is where the tricky part comes in. And if you don't know doctors and how they work, in order to get a diagnosis, they have to work out what the problem isn't before they can diagnose what the problem is. And unfortunately, a lot of them will stop at a condition. And you say, oh, no, you've got acne. Oh, you've got hives. You've got arthritis. You've got Crohn's disease. They don't go deeper and find out what's causing it. No disrespect to the doctors, but sometimes you've got to peel back those layers, very much like an onion. Peel them back and find out the cause. When did it start? What triggered it? And that is always extremely tricky. And sometimes you need an entire barrage of tests. And you've got to rule out all of these conditions and work out, are you treating just the condition or are you treating the cause of the condition? Or you can get that diagnosis of the leaky gut. The small intestine is the body's largest organ and is responsible for accomplishing the breakdown of foods and absorbing the nutrients into the body. 2/3 of the body's immune system can be found in the small intestine. How's that for a scary thought? And back in the Dark Ages, it was almost routine that you had your tonsils removed at a certain age, and you had your appendix removed at a certain age. And they could never understand. The standing joke when I was growing up, at least, was that what are tonsils and the appendix in your body for? And the standing joke was to pay for your doctor's kids' university studies. Now they have found that tonsils and your appendix are actually key parts of your immune system. So you've had a disservice done if you've had to have your tonsils removed if they weren't chronically infected. Obviously, if they get infected very, very regularly, you need to remove them. However, they are part of the immune system, and in my opinion, we need to find out what's causing them to overactivate. And your appendix is also part of the immune system. And one of the things that they say about appendicitis or an inflamed appendix is that is an indication of lack of or low fiber in your system. This is how the body provides protection from the accidental ingestion of toxins or pathogens that could make us ill. It filters it through your whole system. So you ingest the toxin and body breaks down everything, works out what is food, what is vitamins, what is minerals, what is protein, breaks it down into an amazing sorting system. And then it's got to work out, is this toxic or is it not? Is this bad bacteria? Is it good bacteria? Can we use it? Can we not use it? And then it's got to filter all of that out even more. Leaky gut syndrome, pardon me, is a condition in which the permeability of the small intestine is altered. Undigested foods and toxins produced by bacteria are absorbed into the body, activating the immune system and creating this wide variety of symptoms. Just like a headache is a symptom, it is not a problem on its own. Headache could be a symptom of anything from eye strain, exhaustion, to a brain tumor, or just plain dehydration from water. So like that, a lot of these other problems are symptoms. You've got to sift through the symptoms to find out what the cause is. Just like a good detective does, If you've ever watched these detective series like NCIS and Bones and those sort of things, they sift through all the information, all the evidence to find out the cause. I find it fascinating. Now, the next thing is food intolerance. I know I personally have some food intolerance to certain foods, and others have allergies. Now, anything which damages the lining of the digestive tract can contribute to leaky gut syndrome. For example, celiac disease is characterized by damage to the lining of the small intestine as a result of intolerance to gluten. Please note, gluten isn't the problem. It's the intolerance. Generally, when you have a food intolerance or an allergy, you're missing a protein that is necessary to break down that particular food. So if you don't have that protein, you're not going to be able to break it down, and you're going to end up with this intolerance. Gluten damages the small finger-like projections of the small intestine called villi, which are associated with the digestion of complex carbohydrates. Avoidance of gluten often restores normal gut permeability and health. Unfortunately, avoidance of gluten does not always restore this healthy gut function, even though it may have been the initial cause of the problem. Once the villi are damaged, their ability to digest complex carbohydrates is severely compromised. Think of a rubber glove. Blow it up, all the little fingers pop out, and one finger develops a leak. You can patch it, maybe you can glue it, but it's never quite the same. That is what the little villi look like in your gut lining, and you damage 1 or 2 or 10 million, you can patch them, but they're never quite the same. Carbohydrate digestion takes place on the ends of the villi, which is the area of the small intestine most susceptible to damage. Undigested carbohydrate in the small intestine provides a nutrient medium for bacteria, which are normally restricted to the large intestine. Bacteria can begin to proliferate in the small intestine, releasing toxins which can further damage the intestinal lining. Undigested foods can contribute to both overgrowth and dysbiosis. Bacterial overgrowth refers to the fact that there are just too many bacteria growing in the digestive tract, although they are not necessarily harmful organisms. Think of mold on meat, for instance, or bread. Dysbiosis refers to increased numbers of potentially harmful organisms and reduced numbers of beneficial organisms growing within the digestive tract, or to imbalances in the microbial populations. That is where I'm ending tonight. So we still have about 6 minutes left. Does anybody have any questions or comments before I stop the recording?